At Christmas dinner, my billionaire grandma Ruth said, "Still living in the house I bought you." I froze. "I don't live in any house, Grandma." She turned to my parents. Their faces turned pale. The crystal chandelier above the mahogany dining table cast a warm, intimidating glow over the 10 guests. I felt the weight of the room's opulence. The porcelain plates, the sterling silver settings, and the general air of casual, inherited wealth that was utterly foreign to my 28-year-old reality. William Price, the struggling software developer, sat between my parents, Edward and Linda, doing my best impression of a successful son. The anxiety was a familiar knot in my stomach. Every year, this dinner felt like a performance I was slightly underprepared for. Across the table, my younger brother Adam gave me a small, smug smile. Adam, the golden child, was living the life I felt I was constantly fighting to earn. He had just celebrated a promotion at the company my parents had helped him get into. Everything Adam achieved seemed to be celebrated, not just as a success, but as a confirmation of my own inferiority. I couldn't afford to take a taxi here. Navigating 3 separate bus routes from the 400-square-foot studio apartment I rented above a noisy laundromat on the east side. The space was tiny, perpetually noisy, and I was constantly terrified of losing it. Grandma Ruth, however, was the only reason I attended. She was a self-made titan, a woman whose sheer will had built a tech empire. She represented an escape I always hoped for, but never seemed to achieve. She was also the only person who treated me with genuine, if sometimes distant, respect. She set down her wine glass with a gentle clink that echoed in the sudden silence of her gaze turning toward me. "William, dear," Ruth said, her voice carrying the practiced elegance of someone who commands boardrooms. "How are you enjoying the house I bought you? Are the neighbors pleasant? I drove past it a few weeks ago, and the wrap-around porch was simply charming. The air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The question was utterly unexpected. A stray, devastating missile landing directly on the dinner table. My fork clattered against the plate, the sound sharp and alien. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "I'm sorry, what house?" The words were barely a whisper, a strangled sound that betrayed the shock hitting me. I looked at my parents. Linda's face had gone a sheet white. Her usual rosy complexion completely vanished. Edward, my father, reached for his water glass and missed it entirely on the first attempt, his hand trembling visibly. Grandma Ruth's perfectly manicured eyebrows drew together in confusion. She was not accustomed to being misunderstood. "The house I purchased for you, sweetheart. The lovely colonial on Maple Drive. I transferred the deed to your name 2.5 years ago. Your mother mentioned you were struggling with rent and needed stability. Maple Drive. That was a neighborhood synonymous with solid, upper, middle-class security. A colonial house. 2.5 years ago. The timeline was searingly specific, aligning exactly with the worst financial crisis I had faced in my 20s. The time I called home, desperate for a loan to cover back rent and avoid eviction, only to be told by my parents that money was too tight. "Grandma," I said slowly, forcing myself to speak clearly, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. "I live in a studio apartment, above a laundromat. I have never owned a house. I have never even heard of a house on Maple Drive." The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, crushing and absolute. Adam stopped chewing mid-bite, his usual smirk momentarily wiped clean. Every eye in the room was fixed on the head of the table. Ruth's gaze shifted, moving from me to my parents, with the precision of a scalpel. The warmth evaporated from her eyes, replaced by something cold and profoundly dangerous. "Linda. Edward," she said, her voice quiet but lethal. "Would one of you care to explain?" Linda opened her mouth, then closed it, her lips forming a thin, pale line. Edward suddenly became fascinated with the intricate pattern on his dinner plate, avoiding all eye contact. "The deed," Grandma Ruth continued, her voice gaining a steady, relentless quality, "was transferred to William David Price 2.5 years ago. I have the paperwork in my study. The house cost me $1.2 million. $1.2 million. A future I had been desperate for, a security I had been told was impossible, had been mine. It had been given to me out of love, and I had never received a word about it. The dizzying realization that my entire existence had been stolen hit me with a shocking force. Ruth's fingers awed the house slept, drummed once against the table. A gesture I knew signaled the imminent eruption of her legendary wrath. "I'm waiting." Linda finally stammered out a response. "There was a complication, Mother. William wasn't in a position to." "Stop lying." Ruth's words sliced through the excuse like a knife. "I transferred the deed to William's name specifically. Not yours, not Edward's. William's. Legal documents do not have complications, unless someone creates them." The dinner, which had started with the polished promise of the holiday season, was thoroughly and irrevocably destroyed. Following the shock of the revelation, the room temperature dropped, and the silence was suffocating. Every eye darted between Grandma Ruth and my parents, Edward and Linda, who now looked less like hosts and more like suspects caught under a harsh interrogation lamp. Adam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and the movement caught my attention. I noticed he refused to meet anyone's gaze, fiddling with his napkin. A flicker of suspicion ignited in my gut. "Adam," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the violent storm brewing in my chest. "Do you know something about this? Don't drag your brother into this." Dad snapped instantly, the defensive speed of his denial ringing loud in the quiet room. Grandma Ruth didn't give them time to organize another lie. She stood, her chair sliding back with a barely perceptible whisper against the polished hardwood floor. Even at 78, her movements commanded the room like a general preparing for battle. "I will be right back." My parents remained frozen, their shared desperation a palpable wall between us. They had lost control of the narrative, and the panic was evident in the rapid, shallow breaths they were taking. I looked at the three of them, my parents and my brother, and the weight of their deception pressed down on me. I realized this wasn't just a mistake or an oversight, this was a deliberate, 2.5-year deception built on my back. Ruth returned within 5 minutes, holding a stiff, manila folder. She dropped it onto the mahogany table with enough force to make the silverware jump and settle with a metallic chime. The sound was a definitive period on the silence. Inside were documents, official papers stamped with seals, signatures, and even photographs. She produced a color photograph, glossy and high resolution, and slid it toward me. "This," she announced, "is the house at 428 Maple Drive." It was beautiful. A 3-bedroom colonial with pristine white shutters and a welcoming wraparound porch. The front yard boasted a garden that looked professionally maintained, exactly the kind of stability and beauty I had longed for while staring at the black mold in my bathroom. It was everything I had ever dreamed of owning. A life snatched away before I even knew it existed. "And this," Ruth continued, producing another document, Is the deed transfer signed and notarized? William David Price, owner. As of December 15, 2.5 years ago. She looked directly at Linda, her eyes glacial. The same day, you called me crying about how William was about to be evicted and needed desperate financial help. I felt a dizzying pressure in my head. Eyes was about to be evicted, I said numbly, the pieces clicking into place. From my apartment. I called Mom and Dad for help. And you told me you didn't have the money. I was 26 then, working 2 service jobs, barely surviving. A surge of cold fury hit me. Remembering my parents' dismissive words about learning to budget better. And yet, Grandma Ruth stated flatly, pulling out a final document. According to my records, I also funded Adam's recent wedding to the tune of $89,000. Adam's face flushed a deep red, finally meeting my gaze with raw panic. Grandma, that's not. No. What's not fair is that I'm bringing it up at Christmas dinner. Ruth interrupted, her voice scathing. You're absolutely right. What is profoundly unfair is that I bought your brother a house and he never received it. Linda finally burst into tears. The theatrical, high-pitched sobs I had seen manufactured my entire life to deflect blame. We were going to tell him, she wailed. Adam needed a place to stay after college, and the timing was perfect. And we thought, you thought you'd steal from your own son. Grandma, Ruth finished, the question hanging in the air, cold as a steel blade. You forged his signature, didn't you? Changed the deed somehow. Dad finally found his voice, high and defensive. We didn't forge anything. William signed a power of attorney when he was in college, remember. For medical decisions if something happened. We just used it to handle the property transfer on his behalf. Handle it right into Adam's name, you mean? I interjected, the sickening clarity making me feel faint. You've been living in my house, Adam, for 2.5 years. Adam looked genuinely ashamed, finally meeting my eyes. I didn't know at first. They told me they bought it for me as a graduation present. I only found out the truth about 6 months ago, when I saw some paperwork in Dad's office. And you didn't tell me. The betrayal from my brother, the person I had shared a childhood with, cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to, Adam said quietly, but Dad said it would destroy the family. That you were doing fine without it. Doing fine. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I work 2 jobs to afford a 400-square-foot studio with black mold in the bathroom. I eat instant ramen 4 nights a week. I haven't been to a dentist in 2 years because I can't afford it. But sure, Adam, I'm doing fine. Grandma Ruth returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled. The performance was over, the judgment was about to be rendered. Edward. Linda. Here is what is going to happen. Her voice was measured, completely void of emotion. You have exactly 48 hours to transfer the deed to that house into William's name. The correct name this time. No tricks, no loopholes, no last-minute complications. But Adam lives there. Mom protested weakly, her tears drying instantly in the face of the ultimatum. He has a job nearby and his fiancée. Should have thought of that before you stole from your own child. Ruth's tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. 48 hours, or I will instruct my attorneys to pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and theft. I don't care if it is Christmas. Dad pleaded, a desperate quality in his voice I had never heard. You can't do this. Adam's wedding is in 4 months. We've already sent out invitations with the house address on everything. Then I suggest Adam finds a new address quickly. Ruth turned to me, her expression softening slightly. William, you will stay here with me until this is sorted out. Your old room is exactly as you left it. The pieces had clicked into place with terrifying finality. Not only had they stolen my inheritance and my security, they had cut me off from the one person who would have helped me, painting me as the prodigal son who had abandoned the family. How could you? I looked at my mother, searching for any explanation that could humanize the monstrousness of the act. I'm your son. Adam needed it more, she said, her voice weak but still justifying. You were always so independent, so capable. We knew you'd figure things out. But Adam, he needed help getting started. So you gave him my house. The words tasted bitter. You took something that was meant for me, something Grandma gave me out of love, and you handed it to your favorite child. Don't be dramatic. Dad snapped, his face reddening. It's not like you were homeless. I almost was multiple times. I laughed, the sound tight and painful. Do you know how many nights I sat in my car, trying to decide if I should use my last $20 for gas to get to work or for food? Linda mumbled something about teaching me responsibility. You were stealing from me, I corrected, standing up, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. And lying to my face while you did it. Adam pushed his plate away. I'll move out. William, I am sorry. I really didn't know for the first 2 years. But you knew for 1 year and said nothing. I pointed out. That still makes you complicit. I know. He looked genuinely miserable, a small, weak victory that felt meaningless. I need copies of everything, I said to Grandma Ruth, surprised by the calm, hard edge in my voice. All the documents, all the proof. I want my own records. Of course, dear, she said, patting my hand. I'll have my assistant make copies first thing tomorrow morning. And I want to see the house, I continued, a new determination hardening my resolve. I want to walk through what should have been mine for the past 3 years. I'll arrange it, Ruth promised, her expression fierce and proud. I'll also have my attorneys review everything to ensure there are no other surprises your parents might have pulled. That got my attention. Other surprises. The dinner was destroyed, the family was broken, and the house was a crime scene. But was the house theft merely the tip of an iceberg I hadn't yet seen? My mother made a choking sound from across the table. I realized with a fresh wave of dread that we had only just begun to uncover the depths of their betrayal. The shock of the house theft was immediately eclipsed by the implication that the house was only the beginning of their deception. I looked at my mother's choking face and the desperate darting of my father's eyes. A single house, worth $1.2 million, was a massive theft, but the depth of their manipulation hinted at a much larger, darker history. Other surprises, I repeated, the numbness starting to crack, revealing a deep, chilling dread. Grandma Ruth, however, maintained her composure. I've made several financial gifts over the years. William, she said carefully, addressing me but keeping her gaze fixed on my parents. College funds, trust accounts, various investments meant for both you and Adam. I'd like to verify that everything ended up where it was supposed to. Linda whimpered. A small, high-pitched sound of fear. Oh God, I breathed. What else did you take? Nothing, Dad insisted, but his eyes darted away instantly. His denial was loud, but his body language was a scream of guilt. Your college fund went to your college, William. Mom added quickly, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. Some of it. Most of it. Mostly. Grandma Ruth asked pointedly, raising an elegant, skeptical eyebrow. All of it. The silence that followed was damning. It stretched out, heavy and filled with unsaid accusations. Some of it had to be reallocated. Mom finally admitted, speaking barely above a whisper. Adam's wedding was expensive. We needed to bridge the gap. And how much? I demanded, my voice dangerously flat. Does it matter? Dad snapped, his defensiveness returning. You graduated, didn't you? You got your degree. I graduated with $70,000 in student loans. I said slowly, the memory of that suffocating debt returning. Because you told me the college fund wasn't as much as Grandma thought it was. You said she'd overestimated what she'd saved. Grandma Ruth's face could have curdled milk. I put $150,000 in that account, William. $70,000 for your undergraduate degree, and the rest was intended for graduate school or a down payment on a house. Whichever you preferred. $150,000. $80,000. I whispered. You took $80,000 from my education fund for Adam's wedding. I stood there, reeling, calculating the years of stress and missed opportunities this $80,000 represented. I've been paying $700 a month in student loan payments for the past 2.5 years. That's $21,000 I paid toward loans I should never have needed. We'll pay you back, Dad said quickly, desperation returning. We just need some time to. Time. I laughed, the sound hollow. You've had 3 years. You spent my money on Adam's wedding and gave him my house. What exactly have you been doing with your own money? That's none of your business. Mom snapped, her tears drying up remarkably fast, replaced by indignation. Actually, Grandma Ruth interjected, her voice cutting through the rising tension, it's very much his business. Every dollar you stole from William is his business. She turned her full attention back to me. I will have forensic accountants go through everything. Every gift I've ever given with your name on it will be tracked down. I looked at my parents, then at Adam, who kept his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I realized, not just dealing with bad parents, I was dealing with professional criminals who had been operating within my own home. I want all the documentation you have, William, Ruth instructed. Any old bank statements, letters, anything related to those college funds or any bonds you remember me mentioning. We start the investigation immediately. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and absolute resolve. This was no longer about a holiday argument. It was a full-scale forensic operation. Hey, closers. The next 2 days unfolded like a nightmare viewed through a high-powered financial lens. I stayed at Grandma Ruth's estate, confined to a massive guest suite that felt ridiculously opulent after my cramped studio. I barely saw my grandmother. She was either on the phone with her legal team, Mills and Associates, or sequestered in her mahogany study with 2 forensic accountants who had arrived that morning from New York. My parents and Adam were locked in their own private hell in the house on Maple Drive, where the 48-hour clock was ticking on the deed transfer. I didn't speak to any of them, communicating only through Ruth's personal assistant, who relayed the necessary legal requirements with chilling professionalism. I spent hours in Ruth's study, surrounded by her leather-bound business journals, going through years of old paperwork, struggling to remember details of gifts given when I was a teenager. The emotional pain was exhausting, but the process of uncovering the truth became its own grim motivation. Each document found, each figure traced, was a victory against the darkness of their lies. The investigation was frighteningly efficient. The accountants, led by a stern woman named Ms. Davies, worked backward from Ruth's financial records, cross-referencing my parents' known transactions and public filings. The results started coming in piece by piece, confirming my deepest fears. The college fund theft was just the start. They had also cashed out a savings bond worth $20,000 that Ruth had bought for my 16th birthday. Slept, using the money to renovate their own kitchen. The very kitchen where they had hosted countless family dinners and judged my struggles. They had redirected a trust account, meant to vest on my 28th birthday, valued at approximately $60,000, directly into Adam's name a year before I turned 28. That meant the day I was supposed to receive a significant boost, Adam had already claimed it. The final insult involved stocks. Grandma Ruth had purchased a portfolio of blue chip stocks in my name worth roughly $40,000 when I graduated high school. My parents, claiming they were managing my portfolio for me while I focused on school, had sold them all during a market dip and kept the proceeds. I sat in the study on the evening of the second day, watching Ms. Davies compile the figures. She was emotionless, dealing only in hard numbers. The total came to approximately $420,000. $420,000. Nearly $500,000 stolen from me by my own parents. Over the course of 15 years. From my 16th birthday to the present. I felt completely numb. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my struggle had not been a personal failure, but a deliberate act of sabotage. Every time I had called for help, every time I had scraped by, they had been sitting on my security, my future, and my opportunities, handing them instead to Adam. Grandma Ruth entered the study, carrying 2 glasses of scotch. She slid one toward me. "It always takes a moment for the number to settle," she said softly. I picked up the scotch, the heat momentarily shocking my cold hands. "I always wondered why they seemed to resent me," I said softly, staring at the damning ledger sheet. "Why nothing I did was ever good enough. Why Adam could do no wrong, but I was always criticized." "Guilt, William," Ruth said, taking a sip of her drink. "They knew what they were doing was wrong. It's easier to justify stealing from someone if you first convince yourself they don't deserve it anyway." I was about to be evicted multiple times. I was sick. I was barely eating. I whispered, the memories of those times physically painful. All while they were sitting on $420,000 they stole from me. "That is not just financial mismanagement, Grandma. That's malice." "It is," she agreed, her voice hard. "And they actively prevented you from getting help by cutting you off from me." She told me, then, that my parents had been feeding her lies for years, claiming I had asked for space, that I was angry about something, and would reconcile when ready. They intercepted my few attempts to call her, ensuring I remained isolated. The truth clicked into place with sickening finality, the gradual isolation, the constant dismissal of my struggles. My parents hadn't just stolen money, they had systematically cut me off from the one person with the resources and will to help me, all while funding Adam's lifestyle with my opportunities. I was 28 years old, and $500,000 had been systematically stolen from me my entire adult life. The house deed transfer was due in the morning. The final confrontation was looming. We were armed with undeniable proof of a systematic, calculated betrayal. The scale of the deception was overwhelming, but it was also clarifying. I knew exactly who they were now, and the time for soft understanding was over. The lawyers and accountants worked with frightening efficiency, turning William's suspicions into undeniable facts. The 48-hour window for the deed transfer was closing, and the magnitude of the financial crime became sickeningly clear. On the morning of the third day, the final tally was delivered. I sat in Grandma Ruth's study with Ms. Davies, the lead forensic accountant, who presented the findings with sterile detachment. The house on Maple Drive, the $80,000 diverted from my college fund, the $20,000 savings bond, the $60,000 trust fund, the $40,000 stock portfolio. It totaled approximately $420,000. $420,000. Half a lifetime of financial sabotage, codified on a single spreadsheet. The patterns are consistent, Mr. Price, Ms. Davies stated, her voice brisk. All transactions point to a systematic reallocation of assets, designated for you into assets, or expenses benefiting your parents and your brother, Adam, over the last 15 years. I looked at the number, feeling completely numb. It wasn't an abstract sum. It was the physical representation of every hardship, every cold night, every opportunity lost. It was the amount of money stolen from me to fund the very entitlement my parents often criticized me for lacking. I realized then that my struggle had been a calculated performance they demanded of me. They hadn't just let me suffer. They had engineered the suffering to justify the theft. It was easier to take the money meant for the son who was too proud and too capable than from the golden son who needed support. Grandma Ruth dismissed Ms. Davies and sat down, pouring 2 cups of tea. The formal environment of the study felt suddenly suffocating. I always wondered why they seemed to resent me. I repeated, the question coming out in a small, exhausted breath. Why nothing I did was ever good enough. Why Adam could do no wrong, but I was always criticized. Ruth sighed, a rare display of emotion. Guilt, William. It's the psychological fallout of being a thief. They knew what they were doing was wrong. It's easier to justify stealing from someone if you first convince yourself they don't deserve it anyway. If they convince themselves you were too capable, too independent, or even slightly ungrateful, they didn't have to face the truth. They were robbing their own child. Did they ever love me? The question was smaller than I intended, an echo of the 7-year-old boy who just wanted his parents' approval. In their own broken way, perhaps, Grandma Ruth settled into the armchair across from me. But they loved money and status more. Adam's expensive wedding impressed their friends. The house I bought you, they probably saw it as wasted on a son they had written off as too independent to need their help, or too distant from their influence. I needed help, I confessed, the tightness in my throat finally breaking. I needed them so many times. When my heat was shut off, when I lost that job opportunity, when I was sick. I needed them. I know, sweetheart. Why didn't you check on me? I asked, finally addressing the source of my confusion and pain regarding her. Why didn't you visit or call? I wondered this for years. Grandma Ruth's expression turned deeply pained. They told me you'd asked for space. That you were angry about something and didn't want to see me. Your mother said you'd call when you were ready to reconcile. I respected what I thought were your wishes. I thought I was giving you the time you needed, William. Time away from family drama. I never said that. I whispered, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I called you twice over the past few years, but your housekeeper said you were busy and would call back. You never did. I never received those messages. Ruth's hands clenched around her teacup. I'm betting Linda intercepted them somehow. She knew I'd discover the truth, if we spoke. She knew I would have seen the extent of your struggle and intervened. Everything clicked into place. The gradual isolation, the severed relationships, the constant dismissal of my struggles. My parents hadn't just stolen my money. They had systematically cut me off from the one person with the resources and the will to help me. They had isolated me deliberately, ensuring I had no safety net while they plundered my funds. I was alone, financially and emotionally exposed, exactly as they needed me to be. Sales secrets. By midday on the third day, the legal situation shifted. My parents, facing irrefutable evidence of fraud and forgery related to the power of attorney, had complied with the ultimatum. Edward and Linda transferred the house deed back into my name. The document arrived at Ruth's study via a grim-faced courier. Proof that their fear of criminal charges outweighed their desire to keep the stolen property. Now that the deed was mine, slept. The legal battle shifted from immediate recovery to full restitution and criminal liability. Ruth's attorney immediately filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Edward and Linda Price for fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty, backed by Ms. Davies' meticulous documentation. A court-ordered no-contact agreement was filed, preventing my parents and Adam from reaching me except through their newly hired, and no doubt expensive, attorney. As the documents were signed, Ruth turned to me. Adam has been informed he needs to vacate the premises by the end of the week. The house is legally yours, William. You need to see it. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, yet a flicker of resolve remained. I needed to see it, not as a symbol of victory, but as a physical place to reconcile the fiction they had created with the truth I now possessed. Adam moved out of the house on Maple Drive later that afternoon. I stood in the driveway with Grandma Ruth, watching the movers load boxes into trucks. The house was beautiful and silent, the reality of it shocking after the 2 years I'd spent imagining what could have been. The gold standard Adam had enjoyed was ending in boxes. Adam walked over, looking pale and miserable. Some of this stuff is probably yours, William, he said awkwardly, gesturing at a few boxes. The television, the shelving I bought, thinking it was my place. Keep it, I said, my voice empty. I don't want anything that reminds me of this. He nodded, looking down. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I should have said something when I found out. Yes, you should have. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I didn't know if I ever would be. His betrayal, as my brother, hurt almost as much as my parents' criminality. He was my blood, my childhood friend, and he had chosen comfort over honesty when it mattered most. Did you ever think about me? I asked suddenly, the question burning with years of suppressed pain. When you were living here, hosting parties, sleeping in the master bedroom, did you ever wonder how I was doing in that apartment with a broken heater and the cockroaches? Adam flinched, his head dropping. I tried not to think about it. That's honest, at least. I crossed my arms. Did Mom and Dad ever talk about me when you had family dinners here? In my house. Sometimes. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. Mom would say you were too proud to accept help. Dad would say you needed to learn self-reliance. They made it sound like you were stubborn, Like you chose to struggle. And you believed them. I wanted to believe them. Adam admitted, his voice barely audible. It was easier than admitting my whole life was built on theft. He excused himself to talk to a mover. I stayed in the driveway of the life that should have been mine 3 years ago. The house was empty now, awaiting my possession. Yet I felt only a desolate emptiness. I had the truth, and I had the property. But the cost was the total destruction of my family, and the painful realization that I had spent my entire adult life believing a monstrous, self-serving lie. I was ready to walk inside, but I knew that the emotional work was only just beginning. Standing in the empty driveway of the house that should have been his, slept, William began to feel the full weight of his stolen life. Adam's truck pulled away, signifying the end of his comfortable tenure, and I was left alone with the legal victory and the emotional wreckage. I walked through the house alone. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops, and stainless steel appliances. Everything was polished, modern, and spacious, the antithesis of my 400-square-foot reality. I wandered from room to room, running my hands along walls that should have been familiar, but felt completely foreign. This was mine, legally. Rightfully mine. But it felt like wearing someone else's clothes. I found myself in the master bedroom, the largest and most luxurious space, staring at the empty patch of carpet where Adam's king-size bed must have been. The faint indentations in the carpet were still visible. Marks. Left by furniture that had sat there for 3 years. 3 years of Adam sleeping here. Waking up to sunlight through these windows. Living the stable life that was meant to be mine. The controlled rage I had maintained through the lawsuits and negotiations hit me so hard. I had to sit down abruptly on the floor. I had been rational and procedural. Now, alone in this quiet, empty space, everything crashed over me at once. I didn't just weep. I cried harder than I had since I was a small child. Great, heaving sobs that left me gasping for air. How could they have done this? How could the people who raised me, who claimed to love me, steal from me so systematically? Every birthday card signed, love, Mom and Dad, had been a lie. Every holiday phone call asking how I was doing had been a performance. They had known exactly how I was doing, because they had engineered my struggles. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old text messages. There was one from 2 years ago, sent at 11 at night. Mom, my car broke down on the highway. AAA will tow it, but the mechanic says it needs $800 in repairs. I don't have it. Can you help? I'll pay you back. Her response was chillingly clear in its brevity. Sorry, honey. Dad and I are stretched thin this month. Maybe try asking your boss for an advance. I'd ended up taking out a payday loan with a predatory interest rate, spiraling into months of financial stress. Meanwhile, my parents had been sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars they had stolen from me. Another message, this one from 3 years ago. I got accepted to that professional certification program I told you about. It cost $3,000, but it would really help my career. Any chance you could loan me half, I'll save the rest. Her response. That's wonderful, dear, but we really can't spare that right now. Maybe it's a sign to focus on what you have rather than reaching for more. I'd lost the opportunity. Someone else in my cohort got the certification and was promoted 6 months later to the position I wanted. All for the lack of $3,000. While my parents have hundreds of thousands they had taken from me. The phone slipped from my hands. I lay down on the carpet, staring at the ceiling. in the indentations left by my brother's furniture. Grandma Ruth found me there about an hour later. She had let herself in with a spare key, worried when I hadn't answered her goodnight call. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, sitting down beside me on the floor with surprising grace. "It's hitting you, isn't it? I keep thinking about all the times I needed them." I whispered, my voice raw and broken. "All the times I begged for help, and they said no. They watched me struggle and did nothing. They did worse than nothing," Grandma Ruth said gently. "They actively prevented you from getting help by cutting you off from me. They isolated you deliberately." "Why?" The question came out like a child's plea. "Why did they hate me so much?" "They didn't hate you, darling. They just loved Adam more." She smoothed my hair back from my forehead. "Some parents have favorites. It's ugly and unfair, and it damages everyone involved. But it's the truth. Your mother always resented that I was financially successful when she struggled. I think she saw you as an extension of me, independent and capable." Adam reminded her of herself, needing support and validation. She poured everything into him because she was really trying to save herself. "That's not fair to me." "No, it's not. None of this is fair to you." She helped me sit up. "But you need to understand that their choices say everything about them, and nothing about your value as a person." I realized she was right. Even now, part of me wondered if I was overreacting, if I should just forgive and move on like they wanted. Years of gaslighting had left their deep mark. I looked at her, exhausted but finding a small, hard core of resolve returning. "I need help figuring out how to move forward from this, Grandma. The emotional damage is worse than the theft." "I know," she said firmly. "We've dealt with the thieves. Now we deal with the trauma. I've already contacted a specialist in family trauma and financial abuse. You will begin therapy immediately. And you will begin making this house your own. We will build a good life despite what they did." That night, I started blocking all attempts at communication from my parents. Linda tried reaching out through social media, her messages swinging wildly between tearful apologies and accusatory anger. "We only did what we thought was best. Please don't destroy this family over money." I blocked her everywhere. Dad had his sister call me. "Your father's having chest pains from the stress. You're killing him with this vendetta." I hung up and blocked that number too. The manipulation felt utterly transparent now, stripped bare of any pretense of love. I had the house, and I had my grandmother's support, and tomorrow, the legal battle would continue, armed with the evidence of their total betrayal. I knew the conflict was far from over, but the period of self-doubt had finally ended. After weeks of preparation, the settlement meeting was not just a negotiation. It was William's final courtroom. Grandma Ruth's legal team, led by a shark of an attorney named Catherine Mills, had spent the weeks since Christmas building an airtight case for fraud and theft. The goal was simply complete restitution, and a public admission of guilt, or criminal prosecution would follow. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in a downtown skyscraper. I sat next to Catherine Mills, who radiated an aura of expensive competence. Across the polished mahogany table sat my parents, Edward and Linda, looking smaller and more worn than I had ever seen them. Their own lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Finch, kept his hands tightly clasped. Mr. Finch initiated the session by trying to paint the situation as a family misunderstanding, suggesting that these disputes should be handled privately with grace and forgiveness. Catherine Mills leaned forward, her voice cutting like glass. Your clients committed fraud, Mr. Finch. They stole from their son, repeatedly, over 15 years. The only reason we are offering a settlement at all is because Mrs. Thompson would prefer not to see her daughter and son-in-law in prison. But make no mistake, we have grounds for criminal prosecution. My parents visibly flinched. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, a performance I now recognized instantly as a manipulation tool, lacking any genuine sorrow. We made mistakes, Mr. Finch conceded weakly. But this was always intended as a family matter, an internal reallocation of resources. There was no criminal intent to permanently harm William. No criminal intent. Catherine pulled out the power of attorney document. This is a power of attorney signed by William when he was 19, specifically for medical emergencies. Your clients used it to transfer property worth over $1 million. That's not a mistake. That's premeditated fraud. It shows a clear intent to enrich themselves and their favored son at William's expense. Linda tried to interject, her voice shaking. We were helping both our children. Adam needed support, too. Then you should have used your own money. Catherine replied coldly, pushing the forensic accounting report across the table. Not money that Mrs. Thompson specifically designated for William, or funds that were legally his, like the college account and the trust fund. I sat through the initial sparring in silence, mostly watching my parents try to justify the unjustifiable. Sometimes, seeing how desperate and cornered they looked, a flicker of pity would surface. Then I would remember the cockroaches in my old apartment. The nights I'd gone to bed hungry to save money. The humiliation of having my credit card declined at the grocery store while they'd sat on a fortune stolen from me. The pity never lasted long. During a break in the negotiations, Mr. Finch tried a different, insidious tack, addressing me directly. William, surely you understand that your parents made these decisions out of love. They wanted to give Adam a good start in life. At my expense, I stated, my voice measured. They didn't give Adam a good start. They stole mine and gave it to him instead. But you turned out fine. The lawyer pressed, leaning into the gaslighting. You're clearly capable and resilient. Perhaps your parents recognized that you didn't need as much help. Catherine Mills slammed her hand on the table, the sharp crack echoing in the room. Do not finish that sentence. My client's resilience, despite being robbed by his parents, is not a justification for the theft. If anything, it's proof at how much he could have accomplished if he'd had the resources that were rightfully his. The lawyer backed down, but the argument confirmed my theory. They would use my own strength against me. They would argue I hadn't been damaged by their actions because I was tough enough to survive them. I knew I needed to speak, to inject the human reality of their crime into the cold legal proceeding. I want to say something, I announced, surprising everyone, including myself. The room fell silent, the only sound the gentle whir of the air conditioning. You keep acting like this is about money, I began, looking directly at my mother. It's not. It's about trust and family, and every single lie you told me for years. I paused, gathering my thoughts, letting the painful memories surface. When I was 23, I called you crying because I'd been robbed. Someone broke into my apartment and took my laptop, my phone, the $200 I had saved for rent. Do you remember what you said? Mom's face crumbled. She remembered. You said these things happen, and I needed to be more careful about locking my doors. You said you couldn't help me financially because you just paid for Adam's car repairs. But what you didn't tell me was that you had access to a trust fund worth $60,000. Money that was mine. Money you eventually stole. My voice remained steady, factual. I turned my focus to my father. When I was 25, I got a job offer in a different city. Better pay, better opportunities. But I couldn't take it because I didn't have money for the security deposit on a new apartment or moving expenses. I called you asking if I could borrow $1,000, just a loan. I promised I'd pay it back within 3 months. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. You told me you didn't have it. You said money was tight, and I should try to make it work with my current job. So, I stayed in a dead-end position for 2 more years, watching that opportunity go to someone else. But you weren't tight on money. You just used $80,000 of my college fund to pay for Adam's wedding. The silence that followed was absolute. That's what this is about, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Every time I needed help, every time I struggled, you had the means to help me, and you chose not to. You didn't just steal my money. You stole years of my life, opportunities, security. You stole my ability to trust the people who were supposed to love me most. Linda was crying openly now, but I felt nothing. The pity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. So, when you try to paint this as a family dispute or a simple misunderstanding, remember that you didn't just make a mistake. You made hundreds of choices, over and over again, to let me suffer while you enriched my brother with stolen money. Their lawyer had no response. Neither did my parents. The emotional climax was over. I had used the truth, honed by my pain, as my final weapon. The negotiation shifted immediately, no longer focused on justification, but on surrender. The battle for the settlement terms was effectively won. The final signing 2 weeks later was quiet, but the sound of the pen scratching was the sound of a family officially severing. After my testimony, the parents' lawyer, Mr. Finch, advised immediate settlement. The evidence of systematic, premeditated fraud was too overwhelming to risk criminal court. The settlement took 6 months to finalize, but the terms remained brutal and comprehensive. My parents agreed to pay restitution of $420,000 plus interest, cover all my outstanding student loans, and, critically, make a public statement acknowledging their fraud. Finally, they were forced to surrender any future claim to Grandma Ruth's estate. On the day of the signing, the atmosphere was thick with resentment and defeat. Linda cried through the entire process, her mascara running slightly, transforming her theatrical tears into something pitiful. Dad sat stone-faced, signing where indicated without a word, his hair noticeably grayer than it had been at Christmas. As we were leaving the lawyer's office, Linda caught my eye. Her voice was low, laced with venom and self-pity. "Thank you. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family." "No," I said calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You destroyed it when you stole from me. I'm just making sure everyone knows what you did." The public statement made waves in their social circle. All the friends they tried to impress with Adam's expensive wedding. All the peers they had dined with at their meticulously renovated kitchen. They found out the wedding was funded with money stolen from the bridegroom's brother. The shame was exquisite and irreversible. The consequences were swift and far-reaching. Adam's wedding was postponed 2 weeks after the settlement became public. His fiancée came from old money, and her family did not tolerate financial impropriety or association with felony-level fraud. The engagement officially ended 2 months later. Adam called me once after that, drunk and angry. Are you satisfied? My life is ruined because you couldn't let this go. Your life is ruined because you lived in luxury on money stolen from me and said nothing. I replied. Choices of consequences, Adam. I hung up before he could respond. His complicity, though born of weakness rather than malice, still required accountability. In the midst of the legal closure, Grandma Ruth ensured the emotional healing began. I continued therapy with Dr. Sarah Brennan, specializing in family trauma. Slowly, painfully, I began to untangle the web of lies and manipulation. I started recognizing patterns from my childhood. The way my achievements were minimized, the way my first earned paychecks were instantly rerouted to household expenses, while Adam was given endless allowance. The pattern was clear. Anything good that happened to me was reframed as something that should benefit the golden child. Grandma Ruth, meanwhile, was focused on making the house on Maple Drive mine. She insisted I deserved to start fresh. No more furniture that belongs to Adam's ghost, she declared. We painted the walls in colors I had always loved, but never been able to afford. We hung artwork I admired, and planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that bloomed in riots of color. Every seed I planted felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me, a deliberate act of creation over destruction. The first few weeks in the house were difficult. The emptiness that remained after Adam's belongings were gone felt vast. I still wrestled with the gaslighting. Slept. The small voice in the back of my mind whispering if I had been too cruel, too unforgiving. I kept thinking about all the times I called them, begging for help, when my car broke down, when my landlord raised the rent. Every single time they had excuses, while sitting on a fortune they had stolen from me. How do you forgive something like that? I asked Grandma Ruth one evening as we sat on the newly installed porch swing. I don't think you do, William, she said after a moment. Some things are unforgivable. The question isn't whether you forgive them. It's whether you can build a good life, despite what they did. That advice finally settled the residual guilt. My family was destroyed the moment my parents decided I was worth less than my brother. I just made sure everyone knew it. The house became a symbol not of betrayal, but of the fierce, unyielding justice that followed. I was finally secure, finally seen, and finally beginning to build a life on an honest foundation. The lawsuits were settled, but the process of living a life unburdened by their lies was just beginning. Over the next few years, William learned to make the house his own, transforming it from a symbol of betrayal into a foundation for his future. The garden flourished, becoming my sanctuary. I had therapy to thank for the slow, painful process of undoing 2 decades of parental gaslighting. I learned that my independence wasn't a flaw to be exploited, but a strength to be nurtured. Grandma Ruth lived for another 4 years after the events of that Christmas dinner came to light. In that time, we rebuilt the relationship my parents had systematically tried to destroy. She taught me about investments and business, slept, shared family stories I'd never heard, and treated me like the grandson she'd always wanted to be close to. She helped me realize that the resources she intended for me had not been wasted. They had simply been delayed. When Ruth passed, slept, the settlement and the long public silence paid their final dividend. She left her entire estate to me, $53 million plus significant property and investments. Her will was explicit, noting that my parents, Edward and Linda Price, and my brother, Adam, had already received their inheritance in the form of the money they'd stolen from me, and were entitled to nothing further. They contested the will, of course. Their lawyer, Mr. Finch, mounted a desperate, final attempt to invalidate the document on the grounds of undue influence. The case was thrown out in less than a month. The judge's ruling was particularly scathing about parents who would defraud their own child, noting that the disinheritance was not arbitrary, but directly linked to the documented financial crimes. I used a portion of the inheritance to start a foundation dedicated to helping young men and women who had been financially abused by their families. It was amazing how many stories like mine existed, how many sons and daughters had been robbed to fund golden child siblings, how many young adults struggled in silence while their families lived comfortably on stolen money. The foundation has helped over 3,000 people in the past 7 years, providing legal aid, financial counseling, housing assistance, and education funding. Everything I wished I'd had during those years of struggling alone. My parents, I haven't spoken to them in 8 years. I hear through distant relatives that they moved to Florida, forced to downsize significantly after paying the massive settlement and legal fees. Linda still tells people I am ungrateful and cruel, the narrative never changing. Edward apparently doesn't talk about me at all, unable to face the truth. Adam reached out when I turned 36. He'd gotten sober, he said, and had made amends, working through his guilt and entitlement. He wanted to apologize properly, not seeking forgiveness but merely to acknowledge the harm. We met for coffee. He looked different, humbler, with a wary maturity that replaced the old entitlement of the golden child. I was a coward, he said, avoiding none of my questions. I knew it was wrong, and I said nothing because I was comfortable. I benefited from theft, and I justified it by telling myself I didn't know at first. You knew for a year. I reminded him, the fact still sharp. I did. He nodded. And those 6 months of silence, William, they make me complicit in everything they did. I understand that now. I studied his face, looking for manipulation or self-service. I found only genuine, painful remorse. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly, maintaining my guarded distance. But I appreciate you saying it. I don't expect forgiveness, Adam replied. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I took from you. Not just money or a house. I took your ability to trust your family. I took years of security and peace of mind. I stood by and let it happen. We talk occasionally now, cordial, distant. I don't know if we'll ever be close. But he's working to make amends through actions, not just words. He volunteers at the foundation, doing outreach, sharing his story as a warning to other golden children who justify their privilege. Sometimes people ask if I regret pursuing the lawsuit, if I wish I'd tried to work it out quietly, to preserve the family relationship. I tell them the truth. My family was destroyed the moment my parents decided I was worth less than my brother. I just made sure everyone knew it. The house on Maple Drive is filled with light now. I got married 2 years ago to a man who thinks the foundation is the most important work in the world. We're expecting our first child in the spring. My daughter will grow up knowing her great-grandmother, Ruth. She'll know Ruth was a woman who didn't tolerate injustice and who stood up for what was right. And she'll grow up knowing that her father learned to do the same. Every Christmas, I hang a framed photograph of Grandma Ruth above the fireplace. It's from that last Christmas dinner, taken just moments before the revelation that changed everything. In it, she's laughing, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Some people might see it as a reminder of pain. I see it as a reminder that the truth, however ugly, is always worth pursuing. That justice matters even when it's uncomfortable, and that some betrayals are too deep to forgive. And that's okay. I raise a glass to her every year, standing in the house she bought me, surrounded by the life I built from the ashes of my parents' lies. Thank you, Grandma, I whisper, for seeing me, for believing me, for not letting them get away with it. The photo doesn't answer, of course, but in the reflection of the glass, I can almost imagine I see her approving smile.